Hello, today I wanted to talk with you about systems. And I wanted to give a very brief overview of what systems are, what it means to have a theory of systems, and what we can learn from looking at systems and their limitations. So we can start off with the definition of general systems theory given by Niklas Luhmann, who defined systems in an interesting way, where the system itself was defined as the difference between itself and the environment. So both of them, the difference between the system and the environment, let's say this is like a difference sign. That is the system. So it seems strange as it's a sort of a self-referencing definition. So you've got the system in itself in it, and then the difference between the system and the environment. So in a way, you have both extremes of formal logic contained in this definition. You've got the tautology, where a system is a system, and you've got the contradiction, where a system is not a system. So you've got the system being the difference between the system and the environment. How can that be made understandable? It seems a bit difficult to understand. And obviously, one would have a point if one said that it is a nonsensical definition. However, I'm going to try and make some sense of it by looking at a general property that our systems, especially our formal logical systems, have in general. And namely, that is that they are incomplete. So in order to have a system that can have any sort of possibility of creating some sort of interesting synthetical claims. Synthetical claims is meant in the Kantian way, where you get further knowledge by deriving something from your system that is not just tautological, that is not just some sort of self-evident claim that repeats the initial axioms, the initial claims you already know. So in order to arrive there, you need to have axioms that are not equivalent. You need to have axioms that are not tautological. That means you cannot have an apple is a fruit and a fruit is an apple as your axioms. You need to have two different axioms from which things can spring, from which further knowledge can be arrived at. And one other limitation is that these axioms cannot be directly contradictory. So you can see it as a sort of short circuit. If they're contradictory, you've short-circuited your system. If they're tautological, you have an open system, so nothing can follow from it. Nothing non-tautological, nothing non-trivial could follow from it. So you've got these two extreme positions that both lead to no extra knowledge, and it is the kind of sweet point in the middle that in which all logical systems flourish. So that sweet point in the middle, one could say, is that difference. The tautology is the system, and the contradiction is the system is the environment. But the actual fruitful place in which all of systems kind of play out is in that difference. And that makes these systems inherently symmetrical. So one could inverse it. One could turn the system, see the system as a negative image of the environment, and then look at the environment basically, and then you will be back at something, at a difference from something that is not the system itself. So the system may become the environment and vice versa. And you can get this in different perspectives of metaphysics underlying logic, underlying formal logic. For example, it was said that truth and falsehood are sort of asymmetrical in formal logic. So, for example, if you say this sentence is true, it's true. If you say this sentence is false, it's a contradiction. It's the so-called liar's paradox. So in a way, one of them points at the other. You've got truth, you've got falsehood, and truth trumps falsehood. You could also construct the entire system of logic in reverse, where falsehood becomes that which has the same function as truth and vice versa. And you could build the same system in inverse. That would be a concrete example of logical system being inverted in this system environment framework. Now the question is, how can this be dissolved? How can you have a general view, let's say a bird's eye view onto the system? We've kind of started it here already. And one could say that our systems of thought exhibit all these sort of problems. If you look at, for example, the question between idealism and materialism, one could say that in idealism, the system is the subject. It is the subjective kind of spirit, the thought of God, let's say, ultimate spirit in Hegel, something of that sort. And the environment is that kind of inessential non-entity that is the material world. And in reverse, you could flip this on its head, which kind of ironically, historically happened in the transition from Hegel to Marx, where the idealism was exactly flipped on its head and turned into a materialism, where the system is the entire world of material, of, one could say, dialectical material, in the case of Marx. And the environment is that kind of emerging non-entity that is that dialectical spirit that is seen, especially nowadays, as a byproduct of the material world, as a mere contingent byproduct almost. So there's people that would almost argue away consciousness, that would almost argue against the phenomenal world as being just some sort of negligible byproduct, which is kind of hard for me to fully understand. How one could go forward with a position like that, being a conscious creature. So, interestingly enough, there is the possibility of bringing forward different kinds of logic if one introduces a sort of kind of trinitary logic, as in the dialectic of Hegel. One has like these sort of regular reflective and double reflective modes, one could say. One could also, in easier terms, say this could be the graphical representation of a game of rock, paper, scissors. You don't have that asymmetry anymore. So you could have a different metaphysic, in this case, could lead to a different logic, in this case. And then one would change the dynamic of the system itself, and that which lies outside of the system has been kind of incorporated into the system. So these were just some introductory thoughts into what has been said about systems. There's much more to be said, obviously. One could get into cybernetics, and perhaps I will in a future video. But this far, I wish you a good day, and I will see you next time.